Israel. So the resolution comes down. Hamas says, we'll give you back a couple dozen. The resolution says all. People say, well, they're a terror organization. You know, of course, Israel's going to have more conditions on them. They're a fully functioning democracy. Is that fair? And is that the way you would play it?
Well, you know, I think, first of all, I think the most important thing for everybody to do is to express compassion for the people right now, particularly all the children who are suffering in Gaza. And I think the point that you made earlier was a really important one, that Israel is doing more right now to protect human life and has done more over the past 16 years to avoid this outcome than we would expect of any nation in the world. Hamas has bombarded Israel since 2006 with over 30,000 missiles and mortars. There are people in whole sections of Israel who I've talked to who have raised their children in bomb shelters. Their kids have PTSD. If Cuba sent a single missile onto Miami, we would be there in an instant. And Hamas has been targeting civilian populations for 16 years.
Right.
With thousands of missiles sometimes. And since this attack, they've sent 9,500 missiles. So, you know, Israel has done something I think nobody else in the world has ever done, which is it built the Iron Dome so that it would not have to attack Gaza. What happened on October 7th with this attack was the worst slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust, made them realize that this was no longer just a tactical problem that they could deal with defensively, that it is now a strategic threat, the survival of their nation, and they need to go in there. And Hamas, of course, did not build bomb shelters for its civilian population.
Right.
It built tunnels, 1,300 miles of tunnel, or 1,300 tunnels, 300 miles for its fighters, and it's protecting them and using civilians as shields. So I think as you said, it's almost an insurmountable problem for Israel.
So, Bobby, how would you address, with your strongest base, which is younger voters, how they're handling it here and on college campuses, basically saying this is what Israel gets? Israel is an occupier. Israel is a colonizer. And October 7th was just a cry of the desperate from all of the oppression. And it's about Israel. That's the real problem here, not Hamas, which is the first time I've ever heard in America any kind of explanation for the actions of a terror organization.
I think that there's just a tsunami of misinformation and kind of moral bankruptcy that we're seeing on the college campuses about this issue, and you know, the idea that Israel is an apartheid state because it's a Jewish state. Israel is the only nation in the region that does not have an official religion. All the other surrounding nations are Muslim. You know, there's 40 nations in the world, 42 that have official religions. There is none in Israel. Israel is a free nation. It's a democracy. Palestinians in Israel can vote. They can hold political office. Even the prime minister and the president of Israel, if they win that vote, they hold positions on the judiciary. Every court, including the Supreme Court, they serve in the Knesset. A couple of years ago, a Palestinian judge, an Arab judge, convicted the prime minister of Israel for corruption. Israel has freedom in Gaza, you get the death penalty for selling land to a Jew. There are no Jews in Gaza. Oh, you look at this double standard that is being now applied to Israel's behavior compared to the behavior of all the countries around it. There's no other country that is a democracy in the region. There's no other. If you're a Palestinian and you want to criticize your government, you better do it in Israel. Because if you do it in the West Bank, if you do it in Gaza, if you do it in Jordan, if you do it in Syria, if you do it in Lebanon, you're going to either have your throat slit or you're going to go to jail and be tortured. Oh, you know, the freedom that people have, so calling Israel an apartheid state is such an absurd twist and perverted twist. And ultimately, you know, if you're applying a double standard, it reflects a bias, and you'd have to call that bias anti-Semitism.
Hey, thank you for watching. Please go to newsnationnow.com, newsnationnow.com, and you can find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button down below. Then you will get more of News Nation's fact-driven coverage.
This is a day of affirmation, a celebration of liberty. We stand here in the name of freedom. We are committed to peaceful and nonviolent change. We must recognize the full human equality of all of our people, not just to those of a particular religion, not just to those of a particular race, not just to the wealthy, but to all of the people. We must do it for the single and fundamental reason that it is the right thing to do.
A new twist this morning for the country's most famous political dynasty.
RFK Jr. plans
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
on October 9th in the state
that it's time to heal a divided nation and return the power to the people.
Robert Kennedy Jr.
We are told today that our nation is hopelessly divided. But I found something different as I travel this country. I have witnessed an upwelling of optimism that I've never seen before. Something is stirring in us that says it doesn't have to be this way. And so I've come here today to declare our independence from the tyranny of corruption, which robs us of affordable lives, our belief in the future, and our respect for each other. But to do that, I must first declare my own independence. Independence from the Democratic Party and from all other political parties. I haven't made this decision lightly. It's very painful for me to let go of the party of my uncles, my father, my grandfather, and both of my great-grandfathers, but my sacrifice is nothing compared to the risk our founding fathers took when they signed the Declaration of Independence 247 years ago. They knew that if their revolution failed, every last one of them would be hanged. They chose to place everything on the line. When John Adams put his pen down after adding his signature to the Declaration, he turned to those present and he said to them, sink or swim, live or die, survive or perish. From this day on, I am with my country. I'm going to make that same pledge to you today so that I can stand before you, as every leader should stand before you, free of partisan allegiance, free from the backroom deals, a servant only to my conscience, to my Creator, and to you. Every president enters office promising to unite the nation and to work with people from the other party across the aisle. None of them ever does it. They can't. They're already chosen a side. Well, I'm not going to have that problem. I'm going to build coalitions from both sides of the aisle. And except for the small minority of public officials who are actually corrupt, I'm going to tell you this secret. They too want liberation from the system that has captured them. And isn't that ultimately what we all want? Liberation from a system that robs us of our wealth, our health, our hope, our patriotism, our ideals, our freedoms, and ultimately our sense of ourselves as a good and capable people. Is healing our divided nation possible? Let's go take back our country. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
I declare my independence.
I declare my independence.
I declare my independence.
We declare our independence.
I declare my independence.
We declare our independence.
I declare my independence.
We declare our independence.
I declare my independence.
I declare my independence.
Yo declaro mi independencia.
We declare our independence.
I declare my independence.
Few men are willing to brave the disapproval of their fellows, the censure of their colleagues, the wrath of their society. Moral courage is a rarer commodity than bravery in battle or great intelligence. It is the one essential, vital quality for those who seek to change the world.
I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I approve this message. You're riding through a bad neighborhood. Well, that's how half of America is waking up every day, with that sense of impending doom, and not seeing how there could possibly be a good ending. And this is not the way that, young people are supposed to be viewing their prospects. My kids are worried about, they don't think about even buying a house. They're worried about their college debt. Our generation told them, you got to go to college. And now they've come out of college, and the jobs are not enough to run their lives, much less pay that debt that's landed on them. Oh, it's been a betrayal of this generation. And you remember, the other thing is about this generation lived through the COVID pandemic. And they had to make the sacrifice for the older people. That's what they were told. That they had to have, they had to homeschool. They missed that experience. We're seeing this generation of kids that all need remedial education. They didn't get that experience, and then we closed down 3.3 million businesses without any due process, with no scientific citation, with no notice and comment rulemaking, no environmental impact statement, all the things that government is supposed to do before it asks us to make a sacrifice. None of that happened. Democracy was just one guy, a 50-year bureaucrat who never won an election, who just said, everybody shut down your houses, and 2 presidents went along with him and got rolled by a bureaucracy. They never said to him, show me a scientific study that justifies this. And Amazon, who I'm suing right now, Amazon, I'm suing them and Elizabeth Warren because she told them to censor a book that I had written with, not my Fauci book, but another book that I wrote with Joe Mercola. That was critical of the lockdowns. And so Amazon censored it. And Amazon was the one business that they didn't close, right? We all got a 3-year lesson, and Amazon got to help close down all of its competitors. And we got a 3-year lesson in how to use Amazon. Oh, I didn't know how to use Amazon before the pandemic. And by the way, it's a magical experience. It's like, you just find a picture of something that you like, and you hit send, and it's in your driveway in 24 hours. Oh, but what happened? We closed down all these businesses. 41% of black-owned businesses will never reopen. And that convenience was seductive, but there was a cost to it that we're paying now as a nation, which is we closed down all the local retailers. The people in this, I'm sure all of you know somebody who closed the business, won't reopen. They were paying local taxes here. They were the people who had the plaque of gratitude on their wall from the local Boy Scout troop. They were the people who paid for my kids' hockey jerseys. They paid for their Little League uniforms. The money we were giving them was more than I give for the same product from Amazon, but that money was staying in our community and recirculating and making it, enriching us all. And that guy's gone today. But Amazon, at least, they're paying local taxes here, right? No, they're not. But at least they're paying federal taxes, right? Right. Last year, they paid 0. So like I said, they're doing it right in front of us. They are strip mining the wealth and the equity from our nation, from the middle class. During the lockdowns, we shifted $4 trillion north from the American middle class to this new oligarchy of billionaires. We created 500 new billionaires, a billionaire a day in 500 days of lockdown. And we destroyed the American middle class and the prospects for our children.
You went down to the border and looked at it firsthand. What did you see?
I thought I would see a lot of people from Latin America and Central America. But the first group of 110 were all African. There were 2 more busloads. The buses are owned by the Mexican drug cartels. There were 55 people on each bus, and I interviewed each one. They were from Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, Tibet, and India. So there was only 2 families the whole night from Latin America, and they were the only 2 families who had legitimate asylum claims. The Border Patrol no longer patrols the border. They've become essentially travel agents. They're put on a plane within 4 days to any destination that they want in the United States. If they do not have money for a plane ticket, the Border Patrol buys them a plane ticket. The Mexican drug cartels are now running U.S. immigration policy. Everybody who came across the border that night knew exactly what was going to happen. The Mexican drug cartels are advertising on TikTok and on YouTube all over the world and saying, you give us $10,000 or $15,000 and we will get you in the United States. The people who are coming through are given a court date 7 years in the future, but they are in a limbo status. Well, they can't legally work, and so they become targeted by unscrupulous employers who hire them usually on construction sites for $5 or $6 an hour, which they can't live, so they're still sleeping on the sidewalk. And they're dampening the pay for American construction workers, unionized construction workers. There are 7 million that have come across over the past 3 years, and it's crushing our country. I worked with Cesar Chavez during the last 20 years of his life on pesticide issues. But the other big issue for him during that part of his life was closing the border, because he saw what the migration was doing to reduce the leverage of legitimate farm workers to demand decent wages and conditions in their employment. That they're absolutely devastating the social safety net. The people who believe that this is the right thing from a humanitarian point of view, it's a humanitarian crisis. If you like this video and you want to learn more about me and the movement that we're building, please go to Kennedy24.com.
RFK Jr. said he would suspend the NIH's research into infectious diseases, at least temporarily, if he's elected to the White House. Now, while speaking at a conference for the Children's Health Defense, an anti-vax organization, RFK Jr. said, "I'm going to say to NIH scientists, God bless you all. Thank you for public service. We're going to give infectious diseases a break for about 8 years."
Scientist Peter Hotez responded to RFK Jr.'s plan, posting on X, "My view, presumably the 4th major coronavirus after SARS, MERS, SARS-2, which may arrive before 2030, will appreciate that. Same for zoonotic influenza viruses and the arboroviruses in Texas and Florida." He also accused those who want to limit the NIH's scope of research of doing so for political brownie points, writing, quote, "that we have elected leaders, U.S. presidential candidates, gleefully discussing the collapse of NIAID or NIH or dismantling our infectious diseases research infrastructure. To me, says they have no knowledge, concern about our national security and are willing to risk this this for their political gain. Obviously, Peter Hotez, RFK Jr. have been on opposite sides of this war.
Peter Hotez is the one who's too afraid to debate anyone who knows something that's contrary to what he thinks.
Exactly.
And who changed his tune on whether vaccines were untested and scary when it was under the Trump administration, and then when it became Biden's thing, then it was, you have to get one right now, or else you're a deranged anti-scientist person. I'm being very objective toward this person.
No, I'm sure, but he might not be the best fighter, the most credible voice pushing back against RFK Jr. But, is there a critique to be made of saying we're going to basically shut infectious disease research down for a few years? Is that going too far? Is that what it's required to correct some of the mistakes that were made during COVID, to completely not look into this whole area of research whatsoever?
All research into, and first of all, research into infectious diseases will continue because that's done by universities and by scientists. What he really means is these organizations issue grants to fund that research. So even if they stop doing that, that research could continue with private philanthropy or just the support of the universities, and that wouldn't actually be making research into infectious diseases illegal, which is, I don't think, what we want to do. We should have a pause on gain-of-function research, which actually has been, I think, re-implemented, although it was too imperfect when Obama did it. There was too many exceptions allowed. What we really want is more transparency and more democratic accountability of top health advisor officials like Dr. Anthony Fauci. It's no longer him. It's the new replacement. The American people, vis-a-vis their legislators, people like Senator Rand Paul and others who have been grilling these officials on what they're doing. I want to see more of that, and I want to pause dangerous, risky research under unsafe lab conditions in China or anywhere else. Look, I don't need a total ban on all research being done. Seems to be going a little broad.
Maybe you should run for president, Robbie, because that sounds a lot more reasonable and frankly tailored to what the concerns were about what happened during COVID than saying we're going to give infectious disease a break for about 8 years. What's the scientific principle? What is the public health rationale for the 8-year number?
Maybe I think that's
not 12 years, not 4 years.
I think it just means he'd be president
until I'm out of. So basically, what you're saying, that does feel kind of plainly political to say when I'm president, because part of my brand is being anti-vax. And I'm not saying he wouldn't characterize himself like that, obviously. I'm sorry, I don't mean to put words in his mouth. But part of my brand is being skeptical about the way that at least the COVID vaccines were rolled out. I am just going to flatten this whole realm of investigation or of oversight. It reminds me of the kind of messaging that we've seen from Vivek Ramaswamy, who recently said that he is going to cut down on the number of people who work for the government by basically picking even or odd numbers and firing everybody whose social security number ends with either an even or odd number to just Thanos. I always do that. Thanos the workforce in half.
I am inevitable.
Okay. Is this this is meritocracy? This is running the government, trying to keep good people and not bad people, or people who are necessary in their positions versus not. These blunt force tools do start to feel like you're not actually interested in improving outcomes from these departments or for Americans, and more about symbolically just raising the field.
Yeah, I would sooner Thanos snap half the entire federal workforce probably than I would just shut down the NIH for 8 years. We have too many federal employees. Obviously, I would like the cuts to be more thought through than are you an odd or an even. But does
that include military personnel? I would love there to be huge cuts to the military, but again, are you going to unwind this in a way that makes sense in terms of the public safety? Or are you just doing it to be doing it?
Right.
These are very spicy ideas that I think, if they were more publicized, the mainstream would not be happy with.
We can use,
the public, rather.
I can only get so excited about this.
No, I don't mean the mainstream like the establishment. I mean the average American, many of whom, frankly, work for the government.
Yeah. and many of whom know how pointless a lot of the government work is because they see it firsthand. But
sure, but are you going to have a just transition? Or are you just going to have massive unemployment? I mean, these are questions that serious people have to answer. And I think that we were open to creative solutions that many of these younger, newer candidates are bringing. But when they get accused of not being real politicians, not knowing how things work by establishment actors, I don't like that. I don't think that you have to be a lawyer or a congressman to run for president. Absolutely not. But I do think it's incumbent on all of them, whether it's Cornel West or RFK Jr. or Marianne Williamson or Cenk Uygur or anybody, Vivek Ramaswamy, to be serious. You don't have to be a lawyer to be president, but you have to have really thought out things beyond what the sloganeering is.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, you can be serious and thoughtful and still bad, though, is the problem with a lot of
that's why the establishment's all bad.
Right. It's serious to the experts, the serious-minded people, the government, advisor class has enshrined a permanent bureaucracy that sometimes works counter to the will of the people and even counter to the will of the actually democratically elected political people, which is part of the problem with our National Intelligence Bureau and also our Health Bureau. And if RFK Jr. was talking about shutting, I'd be more, the CDC, to my mind, is the health agency that went really awry during the pandemic, or rather revealed how badly it was managed and run, everything from the early testing screw-up to guidance that quickly became, I guess they say it wasn't our fault, we were just issuing guidance, but quickly became like the rule of law that was erroneous on many fronts. That sort of thing. That agency, this was this agency's moment, and it failed that moment very badly. So there is a place where wholesale reform and maybe, frankly, even some gutting, in my view,
yes, I would love to hear him talk more about gutting the CIA. I don't know.
I said the CDC, but the CIA,
no,
sure,
the
too.
CIA, the FBI.
Yeah.
What's the point of him having this discourse?
Easy. Are you running for government as a Republican? We have a Republican candidate, Brianna Joy Gray, over here.
As I pointed out for a long time, the biggest opponents to those three-letter agencies historically have been the biggest victims of those three-letter agencies, which have been the left.
Now we're all victims.
And I mean, we have always all been victims, but I think the Palestinian censorship issues are really, I think, highlighting for a lot of leftists why they should really take up this fight and stop being mad at me for agreeing with Marjorie Taylor Greene that we need to defund the FBI.
Sounds good to me. More Rising right after this.
Saran did an interview in 1980. He said that it was a combination of liquor and anger over the anniversary of the 1967 Arab-Israeli War that triggered what he did. He said, that night I went to observe the Jewish Zionist parade in celebration of the June 5th, 1967 victory over the Arabs. That was the catalyst that triggered me on that night. In addition, there was a consumption of liquor, and I want the public to understand that. So he felt that it was the Arab-Israeli conflict and a whole lot of liquor that kind of caused that. But you actually flew down and talked to him in prison at one point, right?
Yeah.
And what did he tell you?
He said about that night, he said the same thing that he's consistently said for, 50 years, that he has no memory of what happened that night.
He's still alive today.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what he told you. He just said, I don't remember.
He didn't remember what happened that night. He does not believe at this point that he did it.
Okay.
And what he's always said is, they told me they did it, that I did it. I don't have any memory of doing it, but, I assume that I did it. And he also, he's a very kind of sweet old man. He cried when he talked about the impact of it on, he knows he was involved in it. Mm-hmm. So there's no doubt about that. But he cried when he talked about my mom and, about seeing all of us when we were growing up without a dad.
Well, yeah, I mean, you lost your uncle a few years before then, but now this is your dad.
Yeah.
How badly did this affect you?
I mean, what is the comparison? People lose their parents all the time.
Yeah, but not under circumstances like this normally.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to argue that it didn't have an impact on me. Clearly, it had an impact on me and on my life, and it had an impact on the whole country. A dramatic impact, I would say, on the country. And the direction that we took after his death, with Nixon getting elected, and what happened that summer with the riots in Chicago. In terms of, the impact on me, well, there's lots of people who lose their parents. I feel like I had an advantage over most people because, my father left a really clear moral milestones for me, and he was a heroic figure, so it gave me something to live up to. It wasn't, I think it would be much more difficult if I was, a black kid in Watts whose father got, shot in a gang shootout or something like that, and then, where's your role model? So, and then I had a big family that came together. I had deep religious faith that, helps you through, any kind of, helps you process any kind of crisis like that or any kind of tragedy. And then I had, we just had mechanisms for doing it. I mean, we have been through tragedy before, and we had, I think, a very, very loving family. My mom, at one point, said, I was asking her when one of my brothers was killed. I asked her, I said, do you think that hole that you leave, that they leave inside of you when they die, do you think that ever gets better? That it ever gets any smaller? And she said, it doesn't get any smaller. What your job is to grow yourself bigger around the hole. You have to take the best parts of that person's character and integrate it into your own life through discipline, through restraint. And in doing that, we make ourselves bigger and the whole gets proportionally smaller. And so, I was living in a milieu where those kind of lessons were part of our daily lives. And I think they gave me an advantage in processing that tragedy that, other people in less enriched environments probably wouldn't have.
If there was any doubt a Robert F. Kennedy Jr. run would shake up the 2024 presidential race, recent polls likely cast away remaining skepticism about the insurgent candidate. He is polling very well among independent voters, with polls revealing he's actually ahead of President Biden and Donald Trump with the bloc, according to several polls. He's performing better than any independent or third-party candidate in a generation.
More notably, RFK Jr. is winning over voters under the age of 45, according to polls by the New York Times, Siena College, and Quinnipiac University. The insurgent candidate proven to be a formidable fundraiser, raking in over $8.5 million in the third quarter. Also evidence of his growing support. Should announce as well that Jill Stein has said that her Green Party candidacy is a go. Last week, she's getting in for that race, which will also impact Biden's standing to some degree. So we should talk about that. Jill Stein seeking the Green Party nomination. She was the nominee last time around. Cornel West is no longer in the Green, is specifically running for Green Party, is running as an independent.
Well, Howie Hawkins was the Green Party candidate last time around, but she was 2016, yes. So because Cornel West is no longer running as the Green Party has to find an alternative candidate. It is Jill Stein. It seems, frankly, like a strong choice. You can't deny that she has name recognition, in part because she has been the punching bag of liberals who refuse to interrogate any of the ways the Democratic Party's own decision-making caused them to lose in 2016. She instead has been the bête noire of the party, and you can see this in coverage. She is being referred to as a fruit fly that won't go away. All of the ire from 2016 is still packaged and ready to go at her, but it seems from these polls that the Democratic Party obviously has a much bigger problem here. The problem is that there is actually an appetite for any number of non-Democratic candidates, or non-Democratic establishment candidates, I should say. Some left-leaning people who are running on the Democratic ticket, like Marianne Williamson and Dean Phillips. Some people who are running as independents, like Cornel West and Cenk Uygur. And then you have the main story story here, which is RFK Jr., who is polling at something like 25%, a three-way matchup with Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and who is doing very well with the very constituency group that tends to augur the outcome of these elections, independents.
So we haven't had a poll result this favorable for a independent third-party candidate who's actually in the race since Ross Perot, who similarly polled 21%, and then did ultimately end up with 19% of the vote. I was just reading this CNN article to remind me of the exact numbers. So he's joining a pretty, RFK Jr. has already joined a very small club of candidates who have polled this well without being Republican or Democrat. If you look at his impact right now is to eat into Trump's support a little bit. These polls in the swing states, when you have RFK Jr. not in them, Trump is ahead, well ahead. And then when you put RFK Jr. in, he's not ahead in all of them anymore. He's just ahead in a couple. It seems that. This it's unsurprising. You have both major party nominees, assuming it will be Biden and Trump, incredibly unpopular in their own parties. They're unpopular generally, and their own voters, a substantial block of them want there to be someone else. A lot of Democrats think Joe Biden is too old and would prefer a different candidate. A lot of Republican voters have soured on Trump. Obviously, he also still has a very loud and vocal group of people who, we've seen his poll number. There are, in the Republican side, actually alternative candidates, and he's easily crushing them. So I don't mean to, don't mistake me for saying that the entire GOP is ready to turn on Trump or something like that. That's clearly not happening. But there's enough of an unpopularity, even for their voters, and then certainly with the general election, that people are interested in another choice, and they're going to have one. They're going to have one. It's RFK Jr.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how Republicans start to respond to RFK Jr. going forward.
Oh, you're already seeing it. They're eating. People who were very supportive of him when he was mainly aimed at Joe Biden have really started to remind people of what he said about the NRA in the past, what he said about people who he disagrees with on climate change. Although the history of very non-conservative political views that he's had.
Mm-hmm. Glenn Greenwald pointed out that there is a response coming from the establishment wing of the Republican Party. You have a massive amount of money apparently going into Nikki Haley's campaign. She's launching a $10 million ad campaign in a bid to overtake Ron DeSantis and present an establishment alternative to all of these candidates that seem to be leading right now. And we do see a interest in her coming out of the debates routinely. People polled afterward think that she did very well, are pleasantly surprised by her performance, and there still is an important chunk of the American public, in addition to the overwhelming majority of the establishment blob, that very much wants there to be someone who's going to safeguard things like our consistent aid to Israel and other allies overseas. Glenn Greenwald says that her announcing this ad campaign is basically a call, a bad signal to all of the establishment actors to say, invest in her if you want a return to normal, return to the status quo. Donald Trump, despite being the leading candidate, isn't quite offering that kind of surety to the Republican establishment. What happens, though, when you have multiple people laying claim to this anti-establishment lane, none of whom is doing it perfectly? RFK Jr. has gotten a lot of flack for seeming to endorse, we talked about this last week, some of the college censorship that's been going on. Columbia University last Friday banned 2 pro-Palestine student group, including Jewish Voices for Peace, the leading Jewish advocacy group that put together that really enormous event at Grand Central Station a couple of weeks ago that shut it all down, and subsequently that event at the Statue of Liberty. That is such a huge issue in the same way that COVID was a mobilizing issue for a lot of his supporters. So are these free speech issues, and I do wonder how stable his support is going to be as he starts to take more establishment positions that historically candidates have had to take if they want to win the White House.
Yeah, Nikki Haley certainly has conventional or establishment foreign policy views. If you've watched her speaking for 5 seconds at any of the debates, that comes across a reminder that she is a neoconservative. She supports not just continued aid to Israel, but also still trying to win the war in Ukraine. That's her main point of difference with Vivek Ramaswamy and Ron DeSantis. She does, to her credit, even though her foreign policy is not one I think Republican voters want at all. It's not one I particularly am enamored with. She does poll the best right now against Joe Biden, and even in the three-person matchup with RFK Jr. as well, it shows her. Unlike the other Republicans, with the president, with RFK Jr. in the mix, she's still winning the election. Yeah. If she were the candidate, and it would held today with those three.
Yeah, and back to the left side of things, Cornel West. Some of his critics were concerned that if he did leave the Green Party ticket, he would falter. The reason being that, unlike RFK Jr., he is not a beneficiary of millions of dollars of cash from rich donors. He got dinged, I think appropriately so, for accepting a relatively modest donation from Harlan Crow, but someone who absolutely is not ideological bedfellows with the kind of people who want to support Cornel West. And if you stay on the Green Party, then you do have much more in the way of already won ballot access in states across the country. Trying to go it alone as an independent without millions and millions of dollars to do the signature campaigns that are necessary to get on the ballot in 50 states, it's an incredible uphill battle. And it's making Jill Stein, in some respects, even if she's a less exciting candidate, simply because she's already run before and doesn't have the kind of broad reach of someone like Cornel West that's been in the public eye for so long, in the eyes of some progressives, is seeming like the surer bet, simply because she's more likely just to be on the ballot. That concern is certainly being shown and felt in the mainstream media as people weigh on in her campaign. I think we have a clip of a conversation about Jill Stein's entrance into the race. Let's take a look.
Jill Stein is apparently running as well. She hurt Hillary Clinton back in 2016. You think that's going to be a major setback for Biden?
Jill Stein, it's like a fruit fly that you can't get rid of, It could hurt Joe Biden. Now, again, even if she got 1% of the vote, that could also, come against Joe Biden's coalition. The one thing I will say, though, is that with this potential 6-person presidential race, we're in unprecedented times at this point. So we've been in unprecedented times with the potential nominee of Donald Trump and having felony convictions. So people are really going to have to figure out how to run races, to talk to voters, to talk to the issues. And even with everything as an uphill battle right now for the Senate for Democrats, after this week, with abortion being a leading issue, I still think there's an opportunity to go and talk to voters and really meet them where they are, and Democrats pull it out.
What do you think?
My concern is that instead of talking about ranked choice voting, which would, of course, eliminate the spoiler effect, the status of Democratic Party insiders, the opinion of Democratic Party insiders seems to be to say the very existence of third-party campaigns is a problem, and we want to work to suppress them no matter what. It didn't matter that the Libertarian Party got like 3 times as many votes as Jill Stein, pulling from the right, while Jill Stein
it was 1% versus 4%.
It was ridiculous. So to the extent that you wanted to crush all of these independent parties, it would actually help Republicans have even more of an edge because their independent party is more successful than the left's independent party.
And anyway, the idea that all of the Jill Stein voters, if not for Jill Stein, are voting for Hillary Clinton, or all of the, frankly, it's even less clear on the libertarian side because some of those people would have voted for Donald Trump, some of them would have voted for Hillary Clinton because we're talking about 2016, some of them would have not voted at all. Some of them would have penciled in Ron Paul, and the idea that just claiming that one entire other coalition would get all those voters, and the same is true of Jill Stein. A lot of those people would not vote her. They'd write in someone they prefer. So it's already incorrect thinking to presume that all of the third-party independent voters automatically belong to one of the major 2-party candidates is that's like an ideological concession that I'm not willing to make and you're not willing to make and no one should be willing to make. It's beloved by pundits and pollsters in the mainstream who moving the little beans around on the abacus and saying, well, if they got all these, If
love
Hillary had gotten 60,000 more rural, working class, Bernie interested voters in Pennsylvania and Michigan, she would have been president, but she didn't. Sorry.
88,000 black voters in Wisconsin who came out and voted for Barack Obama in 2012 stayed home and did not choose to vote for Hillary Clinton.
Well, Jill Stein made them do that.
And that is just one state, right? Those were not, those 88,000, and her margin of loss in that state was like 20-odd thousand.
They were very afraid of her, so they had to stay home that day.
Yeah, the blame game is much
She was out
more
there.
appealing than any kind of introspection, it seems. Stick around. We'll have more Rising for you after this.